Well done, man. Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rodney Holmes on the drums. Yeah, thanks for coming out, buddy.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime. We've actually been chatting for, the last couple years now, and I'm so glad we finally got to make something work.
Right.
And bring you out to Drumeo. And for those who don't know who Rodney is, there's almost a 99% chance you've heard him. He's recorded or is a drummer on one of the most popular songs ever, which is Smooth by Santana, along with a bunch of other great accolades working with the Brecker brothers. In fact, you're currently working with Randy Brecker, I believe.
Yep.
And you're going to be going on tour with him and Jim Weeder. You're also going to be going to India for an all-star show in the next couple months,
That's
as well
right.
as Switzerland, too, to do a jazz arts festival.
It's a Jazz Art Festival.
Jazz, my bad.
It's okay.
Yeah. So, man, welcome to Drumeo. We have a really cool lesson planned for you. You're a very creative and unique drummer. There's a reason why you get called to the studio as much as you do, and that's because you have a real personality to your playing. And I think it's a great lesson topic, adding personality to your grooves and to your playing, because, like I said, you're very unique. You have a distinct sound to you, and I think it's great.
Thank you very much.
Huge thanks to Tama, Meinl, Vader, Drumsticks, and Evans for helping put this together and for supporting Rodney throughout his years. What did you play on? What was that song called, the first track you just did?
Oh, that's a song called Ghost.
Ghost.
That I wrote for an upcoming album that I'm doing.
Very cool. So that's coming out this year?
Yeah.
2018?
2018.
Awesome. What's that album going to be called?
The name of the album is Axiom, and I'm about halfway through right now.
Nice. Make sure you find that when it's released. You can find Rodney Holmes at his website, rodneyholmes.com. You can also find him on Instagram at rodneyholmes1.
That's right.
And then on Facebook at Rodney Holmes Music. So make sure you check him out, follow him, and see what he's up to this year. So that's enough of me talking. For those watching on YouTube, welcome. For those watching on Drumeo, welcome. If you want to see what we do here on Drumeo, head on over to our website and sign up. We do this kind of stuff all the time. We're also going to be filming a bunch of exclusive content for Edge members, as well as an interview with some questions being answered tomorrow. So, but today's topic, adding personality to your grooves.
Right.
Take it away, man.
Well, a lot of people have asked me about certain grooves that they've heard me do over the years, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can add some of your own personal touches to just normal kinds of grooves that you may be playing all the time. And so there were two that I thought might be interesting. One is kind of like a halftime groove with a backbeat, and I just wanted to give you some idea of how I come up with different ideas just from having to deal with a halftime groove. Just some of the things that I've come up with over time, playing in different projects and different kinds of music. So this particular groove came from playing like a halftime backbeat like this. Something like that. And so I started just adding little things, and because of certain situations where I've been in where there's been like a space for a guitar solo or maybe just a break, like an instrumental break, I started adding little things. First it was little ghost note type patterns between the hi-hat and the snare. That. And then I started adding the toms. So let me give you an idea of what the actual idea is. The sticking, I guess I should start with the sticking. Let's start here. Basically the sticking is, so we play the backbeat. So if I was gonna play it just kick, snare, and hi-hat, it would sound like this. So it sounds pretty straight and simple that way, but The idea was to add different parts of the kit using the same sticking.
Now, before you go on to that, can you just show us the sticking? It's on the PDF too. This is number 2 we're talking about here. But can you just explain the sticking and how you came up with that? Because that's already a pretty personal touch to a regular halftime groove.
Yeah, it's a. So it's basically like if you were just listening to the phrase. So this is. So that's where the backbeat would be. And I use that a lot. It's a nice pattern to kind of move around a kit. Like I've played it in grooves like this.
Okay.
So you can take that and move it around. So you take that same sticking, and you can kind of move it, well, primarily with the right hand. You can move it anywhere. You know, anything that sounds musical, and if you can get some sort of like the melodic narrative going, like you could use it on the toms, you can use it on the cymbals. So I started using it on the toms and adding some cowbell, adding some cymbals, like this. So you can do it like that. And it sounds cool, slow. So I would sometimes, well, a lot, add the hi-hat just to give people a point of reference so they can hear exactly where the one is. That's a nice thing to do. Close splash thing happening. So the whole thing sounds like this.
I love it.
And that's the idea.
So how did you develop that? Because I remember watching a video of you. I think it was in 2003. Maybe it was the Modern Drum Fest. There was a video where you taught a beat similar to that, actually.
That was 2005.
2005, right. Sorry. But I remember watching that over and over again, and you have that, like you can tell that's a Rodney groove, right? So how did you develop that personality behind the kit?
Well, I think that it's a combination. It's a culmination of all of my influences, and I think what gives a person a personality. It's like I mean I look at it like spoken language, and you know, just like any child, you know, you learn how to speak from the people around you,
right?
You know, your parents, your friends, whatever, like whomever's around you, you know, as a child, you imitate them. And so no matter, it doesn't matter if you're speaking the same language as everyone else, you're processing that language through your own prism and through your own life experiences and through your own characteristics. So even though I'm using the same words that other people use, you know, I'm still saying something
Right.
that they wouldn't say.
Right.
I put words together in ways that are slightly different. You know, I have a way of speaking. You know, everyone has their way depending on where they grew up and what their influences are. So the way I processed my musical influences was unique to me just because I'm me, you know, and you're you.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of different influences. It's from listening to a ton of different dialects of music. And so I just thought of getting, not only playing the groove and getting the groove to sit in a certain way and sound great, but melodically, how can I get the groove to have a narrative all its own, you know, particularly in the context of a drum solo or a break or something like that. And I think that applies to drum solos. It applies to just coming up with grooves that fit music really well. Just to try to come up with something that sounded good, like someone would want to hear more than once.
Right.
And so I just got into the habit of orchestrating things based on the music that I listened to and my early drum influences.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you know, people like Max Roach and Tony Williams and when I was very young, a big fan of Steve Gadd and just anyone who was melodic. Well, any of those guys, they were very melodic. So they were influences, but trying to come up with things that if I hadn't heard them, I never would have come up with any of that. You know, they would open little portals, but it's up to you to step through it and you know, they show you a concept and it's like, wow, that's an approach. So you can extrapolate that and you know, over years and years of just listening to different kinds of music and different drummers that came long before me.
Right.
And they just opened things up to me, like held me to think of doing things in a different way.
So your approach with this and the melodic side of it, going around the toms, making something enjoyable to listen to, that's bled through everything you play.
Yeah.
You try to play. So someone comes to you and say, I'd like you to play a halftime groove on this album. That's kind of what you go to, obviously depending on the song.
Yeah, I mean, well, if someone asked me, you know, if they called me and said, okay, can you play on this as a halftime groove, I wouldn't just start playing
Sure,
that.
of course, yeah.
What I would do is to play the thing that works best for the song, you know, like what the bass player's playing. If it's a vocal tune or if it's an instrumental tune, my first priority is to make the song work and to feel great. Then, you know, if the artist or the producer would ask me, hey, that's cool, could you add something to it? Then little by little, I'll try different things to augment the groove. You know, maybe little things in the hi-hat, like subtle things. Or maybe the kick drum a little busier, maybe playing with the bass player or not playing exactly with the bass player. There are a million variables, you know, it depends on what's happening in the song, but there are other places where I could take it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, take us through that process, this halftime groove. Show us like kind of step by step, maybe play it as you develop it and add some nuances in.
I think in the very beginning, I started just adding other pieces. Let's see. It's like a straight groove like that. You have more of a groove that's more like. So let me do something like that. But something like that. Or keep this going so that this gives the band and the listeners a point of reference, and maybe trying something over here. Something that's not too offensive. Something that still sounds like music. something like that.
Yeah.
Still sounds nice and musical.
Yeah.
It came from just adding things in different situations, and one thing led to another, and I started doing stuff like that. And then that's when that sticking came about. That particular pattern. And from doing that, from some of the stuff that I did with Jim Weeder, because he does a lot of like sort of like rock halftime grooves, stuff like. I started going. Like that.
Yeah.
He wrote a tune called Man Cry that was a halftime groove, and it was like this tempo. And so I started doing this. He wanted something with some tom-toms.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when I started coming up with all sorts of things, because it's a long tune with like 2 guitar solos and eventually a drum solo.
Yeah.
And so I came up with and then eventually with that other pattern.
Very
so it was
cool.
just playing with Jim and playing with different people and just developing ways of expanding,
Do you have
pretty
like
simple
certain
grooves.
licks or patterns or rhythms that you find that creeps into your playing more times than not?
I would say the paradiddle more than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, I think the paradiddle might be the most valuable rudiment. And that's a silly thing to say, like one rudiment being more valuable. I think what I mean is it's a beautiful rudiment because you have to alternate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a combination of doubles and singles.
Mm-hmm.
So what it does is it not only builds your hands and gets you used to switching from doubles to singles, but it also does something with your brain. Your brain gets used to firing the synapses to switch, which is a useful thing. So you can come out of whatever you're doing either with the right or the left. And it's just kind of a nice way to gain more accessibility to the kit. Even something simple as a and then you can come up with different phrases. It just gives you this access to the kit. All of that comes from switching from doubles and singles and alternating.
Right.
So I would say, in terms of getting the most mileage, the paradiddle, I get the most mileage out of that than anything. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have another groove on the page, 7/8 groove. Do you want to talk about that and show us how you added your own personality to that?
The 7/8 groove was something that I like to use during drum solos. But yeah, that came from playing in situations where I had to, where the music, nothing was in 4/4. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing.
Really?
Yeah, I played with this great guitar player many years ago named David Gilmour. Not the famous David Gilmour
From Pink
From
Floyd.
Pink Floyd.
Okay.
Another David Gilmour is a phenomenal guitar player, and he used to write all this crazy music. And I was in his band for a few years, and so I got used to trying to come up with different ways of playing all of these odd meter tunes. And it was always like a bar of 7, a bar of 5, 2 bars of 2, a 3-bar, a 3/4 bar, and something. It was always these really angular shapes. But how would I make that sound pleasant? Rather than like math. So and the songs are very beautiful, but it was complex stuff. So, in an attempt to make it feel and sound less like an odd meter or meters, I started coming up with ways of making it sound, I guess, more digestible to people that don't know anything about odd meters at all. They're just listening.
Right.
So, and playing something like a 7/8 groove. Like something simple, like something like that. I started, again, similar to the other groove, just trying to find different ways of filling it out, making it colorful.
Okay.
And so I started using this double kick drum pattern, which is so that's the pattern. And so let's say I was playing like a simple 7/8 groove. That was how it started, just to get that heartbeat going. And to me, it just sounds nice. It has a nice shape to it. It had a tendency to pull people in, when they heard it.
Right.
So that was the basis of the groove. So the whole thing is. Play that anywhere. You can play it on the ride cymbal. You can play it on the tom, the right hand part. It sounds less like the same angular pattern, like spliced together.
Right.
So when you do stuff like this.
Very cool.
Stuff like that,
Yeah.
and then you can add things. You can do things like that.
Show us that one more time, a little slower if you can. That was really cool what you just did there.
The basic pattern.
Just what you were doing on the cymbals and everything was just so cool.
That's the pattern.
Right.
And then you'd add things like moves around, it has a, it's got a nice hump, you know. It doesn't sound like math. When you have interconnecting parts, you know, it's hard to explain. But
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. So, for drummers watching, like you mentioned, your influence matter is a huge reason why that's how you developed your sound. But what kind of recommendations would you give drummers out there to come up with some sort of personality behind the kit?
Well, I would say that being open-minded is crucial. If you're a younger drummer, I would recommend listening to drummers that came long before you or anyone else that you know, because it seems like younger drummers don't go back and listen to people from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s. You know, they may go back 4 years, and they name their influences, and it just doesn't go back that far. So what happens is you're denying yourself this reservoir, this universe of rich music. I mean, there have been so many phenomenal drummers like over the decades, and it just seems like a lot of drummers don't know who they are. People like Max Roach and Elvin Jones and Sid Catlett and just incredible players. So it helps to know who they are and have some idea of what they did in the past, because even if you don't know it, you're standing on a lot of people's shoulders. You're playing things that were done a long time ago. And then there were people that learned from them and added to that, and there are people that learned from them and added to that. So you're probably playing a lot of things that drummers sort of developed or were experimenting with in the past. Personally, in my humble opinion, I think it helps your music, it helps your playing to know something about those guys or girls. To know something about the lineage, the permutations that music and the drummers that made it or were involved in it, just knowing something about what they did gives you something to draw from. So that's one thing. I'm not saying you have to be a historian, but just have some idea of what guys have done throughout the years, number one. Number two is don't cut yourself off from, I like to call different dialects of music. I don't like to use the term genre.
Okay.
Don't cut yourself off from something because you don't think it's cool to listen to it right away. Because the moment you say, oh, I don't like this kind of music, when you make a definitive statement like that, you'll hear something and you'll hear someone and you say, wow, that's cool. And it's that music that you said you didn't like.
Of course. Yeah.
So remain open-minded and do some research. That's number two. Number three, listen and learn, but understand that there's a difference from being influenced by someone and copying them.
Yeah, I was going to say that because at one point you want to listen and figure out what these other great drummers have done, but you also want to be more personal.
Right.
It's not about imitating, it's about coming up with your own personality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when I was, I guess up until the age of maybe 18, I would imitate people that I looked up to. By the time I hit 19, you can't get away with that. I mean, I couldn't. Like where I came up in New York playing, I mean, you were frowned upon if you sounded, if you're playing the exact licks, and they can tell. So there's nothing wrong with imitating people. But again, it's like a child imitating an adult, to learn how to say certain words. They just repeat what someone else says because they're getting used to using the words and putting sentences together. Once you understand that, you're not going to go around just repeating what other people say.
Right.
So if you can think of it that way.
Right.
However, maybe there are certain words, a certain terminology that you wouldn't even have known about if someone hadn't said something to you. So just hearing them say something or sharing an idea can open your mind to something and lead you to something really cool later on. So that's an influence.
I love it. Yeah.
That's the difference.
Right.
I mean, there are tons of influences in the way I play, but you couldn't recognize. You can say, "Oh, that came from this person," that person, you know.
Right.
Which is how I think they would want it, but because I had to find myself within those parameters. You know, you hear other musicians, you know, older musicians, and they would open the door, and then you have to walk through it, and then I had to, you know, you have to find yourself. But again, just to reiterate, being influenced by someone doesn't mean copying them. Not forever.
Love it.
That's one thing. And just remain open-minded, try things. If you like something, if you hear something and it really affects you, you know, you just love what you're hearing, check it out. You know, it doesn't matter what category it's in. If it's something that that appeals to you, do the research, check it out, see what they're doing, like see what they've done, see what the band has done, you know. Don't just look at 10 seconds of something on YouTube, really check it out.
Right.
And that, I believe, can help you to kind of find your own voice. Even if there are things that you think you might like, but when you play it, you're not really feeling it. That's okay, because then you can acknowledge, like, well, I like this, but that's not really me. So this part of it is something that can help me, but not this part, you know. And there's no disrespect in that, but just be open-minded and do some research and check things out and open yourself up to all the possibilities and be honest with yourself and realize when you get to a certain point, like like I said, I can only use myself as an example. By the time I hit 19 years old, I did not want anyone to be able to hear me and say I sounded like someone else. Mm-hmm. And you can say that you hate me, but just
as long as you don't sound like anyone else. Well, you definitely have your own sound to it. Let's get you to play another tune, if you don't mind, because we want to hear some more of your personality out of these drums. You have another track lined up, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what is the song called?
This is a song called Electric Wildlife. Ghost is new. That's going to be on this new album. Electric Wildlife is on an album called 12 Months of October.
Okay. That
I recorded. Actually, it was released in 2005, so this is old.
Okay.
And some people out there would know this song, but it's fun. It's a cool tune, so I figured I'd play it.
Let's hear it.
All right.
I love it, man. Very smooth. You just effortless behind that kit.
Oh, thank you.
Sounds very cool. So we've got a couple questions that have come in, and if you don't mind, I'll ask you a few of them. First one is actually talking about your kit setup. I know Gene and Shackman and a couple members have asked about your specific kit. And I'll take it one step further. How much of your kit setup has to do with your personality behind the drums? Because I mean, you look at guys like Neil Peart, he has a specific setup. He's known for it. Terry Bozzio, all these drummers, and you have a unique setup too. I always see a cowbell mounted on your bass drum in most of the videos that I've watched of you. So first question is, how big of an influence is your setup to your personality?
I would say 0. I think my setup is a reaction to my personality, not the other way around.
All right.
I was a big Rush fan when I was a kid, so me and this guitar player, we used to get together and play through all the stuff from Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures, and at that time, I wanted this huge kit. Mm-hmm. And after listening to a lot of other people later on, like Clyde Stubberfield and just a ton of other people, I realized that a lot of the things that I wanted to get, I didn't need a kit that large. Like the kind of how I was hearing drumming.
Right.
I think with some people, they really, there's certain sounds or certain things that they want to get, so they need those things. Mm-hmm. I was able to get the sounds that I needed from a kit that constantly got smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the kit is a direct reaction to how I want the music that I was hearing drumistically. Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense, and again, like you can see it, a very similar setup in a lot of your videos, so you can tell that that's influenced your setup, at least your personality's influenced your setup.
Definitely. And I may add a floor tom. I think maybe a 16, a couple of floor toms, maybe a couple of cymbals. Sometimes I'll use a splash, but that's it. And the cowbell, that was just something that I came up with when one of the only teachers I ever had was a percussionist named Frankie Malabé. And so I took a couple lessons from him to learn some of the authentic Afro-Cuban rhythms and kind of how he applied them on drum kit. And so I used the cowbell for that because of some of those rhythms that I was learning.
Right.
And then seeing other drummers, again, from the past that did cool stuff, and maybe they had a cowbell, like Steve Gadd, a few other guys. And I thought it was nice to have it there. And then I found out, I don't know, it was just a nice color to have in any style of music. So it's just a nice sound to go to.
I agree.
Yeah.
I love it. I love hearing the grooves whenever you move to the cowbell. It always gives it another level, in my opinion. Last question before we wrap things up. We're going to do a full interview with Rodney. So for the Drumeo members who have questions that we're not getting to, we'll get to those tomorrow. But the biggest one, we're talking about influences. Who are your top 5 influencers on the drum set?
Oh God, that question is.
I know you probably get asked it a lot. It's a tough
so
one.
Hard.
Yeah.
That's difficult.
Because you don't want to leave anyone out.
That's the thing. I don't want to leave anyone out. I feel really bad, because like everyone is so important.
Yeah.
And even like a lot of guys that a lot of drummers don't know. Just phenomenal players that I grew up seeing.
Maybe mention some of those guys. Because
guys like Tommy Campbell and just wonderful musician. There are a lot of guys that were around town that were just phenomenal and good people. Mm-hmm. And drummers never talk about them. So whenever I leave someone out, I just feel bad.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I'd have to say, there are probably a few that really shaped me at a particular time. Mm-hmm. And Max Roach is a big one. And the reason why I would keep mentioning Max is because there's so much of Max and a lot of drumming in general. That's another thing I don't think people realize, like rock drumming. Like the whole thing of using toms, like using things in melodic ways. Max used to do things like that. He would compose entire drum solos in different time signatures and play the melody on the toms. And just kind of little things that he would do during his drum solo. Stuff like that. And then you hear Steve Gadd, who was also a big Max fan, would, you know, a lot of that stuff comes from Max.
Right, right.
Tony Williams is huge. John Bonham was a big influence as well. I would say they're Tony, Max. When I say Tony, I mean Tony Williams. Maybe definitely Elvin. But I'm trying to think of the people that kind of shaped how I set up my drums and things like that. It's hard to name 5. It's just impossible.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I would. Those are the guys that I would say really shaped how I kind of set up and realizing what I could get out of a small kit.
Right. Well, we're running low on time.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to add? Any other tips or challenges to the viewers watching, the drummers out there who are trying to get their own sound behind the kit before we wrap up?
No, I don't really have much to add other than just fundamentals are incredibly important. But just remember that these are tools. It's a means to an end, not the end. So whatever technical things you're practicing, they're tools. They're tools so you can gain access to the kit and play your music. Play the music that you hear, play the music that, whatever band you're playing in or whatever. But the technique, it's just a tool. So just an important tool, but just, keep in mind that the idea is to play music and find yourself in whatever you're playing. Like if you're in a rock band, or if you're doing a lot of jazz, or like me, you're doing a lot of all of it. There are ways to be authentic and truthful to the music and adapt to the music, but still sound like yourself. You have to find yourself. Just be honest. If something's not happening, be honest with yourself and say, hey, that's not, I need to get that together. I need to work on this, or I need to work on that. But through that, through honesty, you'll start to find your own way of speaking. At the same time, doing the music justice and servicing the song or the situation.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I really liked how you just broke down 2 simple beats, halftime, 7/8 groove, showed how you add your own creativity to it, and that you took them to a whole new level. They're notated there if you guys want to try what Rodney did, and again, try to use him as an influence to your drumming, but try not to imitate him 100%, right? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if they're really young,
go for it.
Then that's how you learn. You imitate people.
Well, a couple members in the chat were saying, if someone told me I sounded like Rodney Holmes, I would be the biggest honor in the world. So
that's nice.
So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you like what you're hearing here, come on over to drumeo.com. We're going to do a full course on the body fulcrum with Rodney, a Q&A, and some other real cool little lessons and quick tips for you as well. So check us out there. And again, a huge thanks to Tama, huge thanks to Evans, Meinl, and Vader Drumsticks for helping make this happen. Rodney, I'm going to leave it at that, but I want you to play us a solo. Is that cool?
I'll try, see what I can do.
All right, I'm putting you on the spot here. I'm going to leave. Everyone enjoy the solo. Rodney, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
And we'll see you later, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.